Did the CIA really blackmail a world leader with an illicit tape or utilize cats as super secret spies? Well, I'm not Gabby B. I know I've been gone a really long time. I mean, it's been months. I mean, with the whole move, and then we had a work trip to Philly, and then we had Mongolia, and then Korea. I got injured. I'm in like a bunch of, IV antibiotics for my injury now, and it's just not getting better. And anyway, it's been a while, and I'm back. And this is actually the second recording of this video because if your husband says that he did a sound check and everything's set up and ready to go, he didn't. And I look bad now because I cried about it, and I'm going to cry about it again because it's been one of those weeks. But anyway, in this episode, we take a small look at the insane plans that the CIA have carried out, or allegedly considered. Starting off strong, we have the blackmail of a world leader. So the extra fun fact about this one is that it wasn't exclusive to the CIA. The KGB also attempted to blackmail this specific world leader. So in 1945, Sukarno became Indonesia's first president. Indonesia had finally gained independence from the Dutch, and this man was a very popular leader. He was loved by everyone, and he was seen as a national hero. The thing is, he was a little bit of a ladies' man, though. And this was a well-known quality of his, leading to a reputation that spread to his enemies. And of course, they were like, how can we use this to our advantage? The issue here is that Indonesia had a significant Communist Party presence. In the released CIA document from October 23, 1964, the following is quoted as the reason for the operation. Quote, "The relationship between Sukarno and the Indonesian Communist Party has been one of mutual exploitation. Sukarno has used the party to help him preserve his own power, and the party has used Sukarno to increase its strength. In the process, the once considerable gap in power and apparent policy objectives between them has greatly diminished. Sukarno, seeking to maintain his own preeminent position to preserve national unity and advance Indonesia internationally at the expense of the West, finds it totally inexpedient to challenge the PKI. The big issue for the CIA and also the British was that the Indonesian Communist Party grew from 12,000 members in 1951 to 3 million in 1964. Then at its peak, it was said to have 10 million members, which was the largest communist party to exist in a non-communist country. I see why that is a large number. And this was fully blamed on Sukarno because he used the alliance with the Communist Party to secure his leadership and balance the strength of Indonesia's army. In the CIA report on the Indonesian Communist Party, it was said that if Sukarno lived a few more years, he would more than likely rule a modified communist regime, as he saw communist countries as his closest partners, and that the Communist Party was Indonesia's strongest and most efficient organization. So that's where the CIA, the British, and KGB get involved. In 1962, a CIA memorandum said that Prime Minister Macmillan and President Kennedy had agreed to, quote, liquidate President Sukarno depending on the situation and available opportunities. Basically, they were going to get rid of him in the fastest, most efficient way possible, where, they won't be implicated and it won't cause difficulties. So the CIA had a plan to produce a pornographic film and claimed that it belonged to Sukarno so that it would be used as blackmail. While the KGB plan was to use a honeypot operation where KGB operatives would be dressed as flight attendants. When Sukarno visited Moscow, at one point the KGB sent young women, allegedly, posing as flight attendants to his hotel in the attempt to get a sex tape of the event. For those unfamiliar with the term, a honeypot operation is one which attractive women or men, but historically at this time women, would use the allure to gather secrets or manipulate a target. So the United States and Britain had such a great fear that if Indonesia fell under communist influence, surrounding countries might as well. The bad thing about that is if this happened, countries like Malaya, which were important sources of rubber, tin, and petroleum, would be lost. You got to protect the resources. The CIA originally tried to sway Indonesian elections, but this failed, and the Communist Party secured 6 million votes in the election at the same time that Sukarno's alliance with Moscow and Beijing grew stronger. And this is when they decided to actually implement their sex tape operation. So a Russian flight attendant had boarded a flight to Russia with Sukarno, and the CIA decided to push reports of an affair between the two. It was alleged that this exact same flight attendant also visited him in Indonesia, making the entire thing really plausible. The hope was that Sukarno would lose the positive light that his country saw him in, which would then lead to loss of power and influence. The CIA heavily pushed the narrative that due to his affair with the Russian flight attendant, he was now under the control of the Soviets. And the CIA also worked hard to spread the rumor that the Soviets had sex tapes of Sukarno, again in the hopes that he would become humiliated and potentially break his alliance with the Soviets. However, when the initial propaganda of his sexual prowess failed to achieve results, and the uprising that the CIA was supporting was revealed to be fueled by them when documents from a captured CIA pilot were found that implicated them, this meant that they needed to increase their efforts to use Sukarno's sexual endeavors against him, since, if you're caught supporting a revolt, uprising, it looks bad. The optics are not great. And this is where the CIA themselves tried to make their own sex tape of Sukarno. Except, instead of doing what the KGB did and trying to set something up, since it would have been incredibly difficult for them to get that elaborate of a situation organized, the CIA opted to find a film that could pass for Sukarno. However, when they couldn't, the thing is, I just imagine a bunch of well-dressed, suited up, CIA operatives, right? And they're all just going through thousands of pornographic films. I don't know, hundreds, however many they had back in the day. I'm assuming it was more of a limited portfolio. And that's exactly why they couldn't come up with a similar looking couple for their plot. So they decided the best course of action was to simply film their own. So the film that they allegedly produced was produced by two former FBI agents named Robert Merhu and Howard Hughes. The film was allegedly called Happy Days and had an adult film actor that wore a face mask that resembled Sukarno. So they didn't even get a guy that really looked like him. They got a guy wearing a mask that kind of looked like him. I feel like that's a little bit more insulting. I don't know. Anyway, so life before AI sounded really tough because in today's world, they could just do the super unethical thing of using AI manipulation to create this. And it would have saved them probably a lot of awkward conversations. So ultimately, the plan never came to fruition. A tape was made, but I'm assuming more rational people at the CIA meant nothing ever released in Indonesia. It would prove unnecessary, as in 1965, a clique of military conspirators calling itself the September 30th Movement kidnapped and killed 6 top army generals. They seized a few key urban points, and they proclaimed a new revolutionary regime. General Suharto, the commander of the Jakarta garrison, he swiftly reversed this coup, but Suharto and the military believed that the Communist Party was behind this coup. And as Sukarno had been protecting the communists, this did turn into a bloody political struggle that ended with him being ousted as president the very next year, and then he died of kidney failure a few years after that. So, if the CIA was just a little bit more patient, they wouldn't have had to film an entire porn. But anyway, sex tape or not, the CIA got what they wanted, as President Suharto instituted a policy he called the New Order, relying on the help of American educated economists to reinvigorate the Indonesian economy. So next up is an operation that a lot of you have requested I talk about. It is Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip was originally called Operation Overcast, and it was the operation where German scientists were brought over to the United States to work on American weapons development and projects. So the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or JIOA, was in charge of this program. And before you're like, that's not the CIA, well, it was a forerunner to the CIA, so it still counts. We're counting it. So the idea behind this program was that the United States would offer jobs and citizenship to German scientists that had great expertise in scientific fields. And by doing this, they would prevent the knowledge of these scientists from falling into the hands of the country's enemies. Basically, the Soviet Union. It's always the Soviet Union at this point in time. Here's the thing. The list that the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency went off of in order to gather these scientists was actually recovered from a toilet at Bonn University. The list was called the Ausenberg List, and it contained the scientists and engineers that worked for the Third Reich. It was named the Ausenberg List after the German engineer Werner Ausenberg, who actually compiled it. So, yeah, very creative. Well, the operation was allegedly called Operation Paperclip because it was initially called Operation Overcast, but it got switched to Operation Paperclip because paperclips were used to mark the files of the scientists that they were interested in. And allegedly, the use of the paperclips indicated to investigators that they shouldn't look too closely at the file of the person whose record it marked. And this was due to President Truman asking that the agency not recruit any Nazi members or supporters whatsoever. However, based on investigations years later, It turns out the JIOA didn't stick with that. They allegedly found ways to hide the scientists' involvements in war crimes in order to secure the knowledge that they possessed. Which, sounds like something they'd do. So according to History.com, Werner von Braun, a scientist whose work was pivotal in the space race, was one of these scientists that was not closely investigated. He was an officer in the SS, and his work was vital to developing the V-2 rocket that was used to, basically flatten England during the war. However, when he worked for the US, he became director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center and the chief architect of the Saturn V launch vehicle that is used for moon landing. So, I went through a lot of conversations about this, and it is there's a lot happening with that. So this entire operation has been debated for years due to the lack of holding Nazi scientists accountable for their actions during World War II, with the argument being that many scientific discoveries would have gone to the Soviet Union had Operation Paperclip not been carried out. Okay, so now we're going to look at some projects they had planned that never panned out. So I'm purposefully not covering MKUltra in this one because I think it would best be suited to its very own episode. So we're going to just move on. And I'm going to warn you cat people out there. This one might be upsetting to you. Not too upsetting, but it's not pleasant. It's not the most pleasant. Anyway, don't say I didn't warn you. Proceed with caution. So how many of you think your cat would make an excellent spy? I don't think my cat would make an excellent spy because she is rotund. She's very loud because she's rotund. And she's very lazy. It's a tough one, for sure. Anyway, the CIA, however, did in fact look at cats and think this bad boy could uncover so many secrets. So in a project named Operation Acoustic Kitty, they plan to turn cats into spying devices. So basically like a drone, but more cuddly. Much more cuddly. The first version of Acoustic Kitty was a modified cat that had a microphone surgically implanted in its ear and a radio transmitter surgically implanted at the base of its skull. The brilliant plan was to place the cat next to foreign officials so that any private conversations that they had would be transported to the CIA operatives. Now, this whole thing was brilliant. It was inspired. It was abandoned after the very first test because the cat was taken out to a park to listen in on a conversation that two men were having on a bench. But, it's a freaking cat, not a well-trained operative. So it walked into the street where it was immediately hit by a taxi. And I can't say we didn't see that or literally any other unplanned outcome happening because it's a cat. I can't tell you the last time I was able to predict what my cat was going to do. So our next story involves a very creative plan to scare children in the Middle East from Al-Qaeda by distributing a devil doll of bin Laden. And if you think you just hallucinated what I just said, you didn't. So this plan was hatched in 2005, and it was named Project Devil Eyes. The prototype of this doll was 12 inches tall, and the plan was that the very normal-looking turbaned bin Laden would morph into a red, one-faced, green-eyed monster when the paint peeled off the face. And all of this was planned in the hopes that children would see the horrifying monster that was revealed and be turned away from joining Al-Qaeda. However, for, reasons no one can possibly imagine, only 3 of these dolls were made, and back in 2014, one of them was actually auctioned off. So that is pretty cool because imagine buying that. I don't know. I feel like that's a cool thing to own. But the CIA has possession of any other prototypes. And after all of these insane crackpot ideas, which I don't know, does anyone else get the vibe that the CIA is just up in some room going, okay, I need the weirdest idea you can come up with. Don't hold back. No idea is too weird. And then everyone in the room just kind of goes for it. They're just calling out the most insane out of the box thinking, because that's what I think is happening there. But that's not the point. I just want to end this episode with quite possibly the funniest plan I've ever heard. Now, this may or may not have happened. It may have been something that is just a well-told story. It may have been completely made up. It may have been something someone said as a joke. All I know is it was super funny and I need to cover it because it's insane. So this plan was never carried out. And for all we know, it might have just been a great inside joke among operatives. But during the Cold War, the US dropped anti-communist pamphlets throughout areas of Europe that were under Soviet control. And that's allegedly when the brilliant idea to drop extra large condoms labeled small or medium on these communist nations as a plan to attack the masculinity of the men, that's when that plan was hatched. Sorry. I know I just hit the mic. But this is truly so funny because literally what is the thought process? Like, would this work on you? Like, if you're, let's say you're from the US and then you find out men in Canada have like insanely sized, would that mess with you? I don't know. I feel like it's not a concern unless the women from your country are fleeing to those men, and then you could be a little bit worried. I don't know. It had to be something like communism is making us have tiny. Maybe that was the logic. They were like, this'll change their minds. I don't know. But yeah, that's everything I have for you all today. I am planning my next video, which will be releasing in the next 2 weeks. Is on Operation Sea Spray, which it was right after World War II, and they realized that the US was susceptible and had absolutely no precautions taken against bioweapons. So they were like, you know what we need to do? We need to test this. So they used military bases, like military men and their families, as basically test pigs for like these bacteria that they would release to see how far they would spread. And then they moved on to testing it on actual US cities, and like one person died allegedly. And I mean, obviously it gets very messy very fast, but I don't want to spoil it for you. This will all be coming up in my next episode. So bye guys. Thank you for watching.